really a pleasure to be here. I had someone ask me a moment ago, you know, you're here at the Eucharistic Congress, look at all of these people, look at this amazing crowd, and they said, do you get nervous? Do you get nervous speaking in front of all these people? You've been sick, you just did your radio show this morning. And I said, honey, I've got 6 kids. I homeschool. This is what I do to relax. This is my only chance to speak for a few minutes and not be interrupted. But let me tell you, if anyone here, if you need your sippy cup refilled, if you want to come and pull on my skirt and ask me 5 times if you can have a snack, it's fine. It won't even bother me. I'll feel right at home. So truly, it's really, really exciting to be here today. And I'm not just saying that, actually. I have a very special element of my story to share with you that has to do with being here at this event today. Being up here on the stage speaking with you, it is very deeply meaningful to me personally, what is happening here today. And at the very end of my talk, I will tell you why. It's a really neat story. I think you'll enjoy hearing it. And today we're meditating on the theme of mercy. Be merciful as your Father is merciful. So I'm going to share my story with you. And listen as you hear it, because I think what you will hear is this is the story of someone who grew up so far away from God. I was so far away from God, I didn't even know that I needed his mercy. And then you'll hear at the end of my story how I realized that mercy changes everything. That was the key to my entire conversion. So to start at the beginning, I was always an atheist. I don't remember ever believing in God, not once, not even as a child. I think I inherited this from my dad. He's an engineer, one of those really logical thinker types. And he always said, though, he said he was raising me not so much to be an atheist per se, but he said he was raising me to seek truth and to question assumptions. He said, always seek the truth. Always look for what is objectively true. Even if it is inconvenient for you, even if you don't like where the facts lead you, it is your obligation to always seek truth. And I tell my atheist friends, be careful raising your kids that way. They'll become Catholic. Now, my mother was not an atheist. She's not an atheist today. My mother is what philosophers call a Macyist. And that is someone who is far more concerned with whether Macy's has an additional 30% off this weekend than whether there's a compelling case for a monotheistic God. Now, both my parents, though, they're very moral people, and they raised me to do the right thing, to give back to others, and to just be the best person I could be. So I was a happy atheist. And I became very vocal in my beliefs through college. I would talk to Christians and question them. And I never had a moment of even questioning atheism. My conversion kind of begins when I met my husband. Really interesting guy. So the first thing that struck me about him is I was very impressed with his intelligence. He grew up poor, just dirt poor. He was raised by a single mother who had little education. She had trouble paying the bills. They were so poor that they often couldn't even run the heat in the wintertime. They couldn't afford the bill. Now, it was Houston, so I mean, it wasn't that bad, but they did all right. But he was very poor, and she had heard in the news, and in the movies and in pop culture, she had heard about these schools called Yale and Harvard and schools like that. And she had this kind of vague idea that if you go to one of those schools, you won't be poor like she was. So she just told my husband, her son, her only child, she said, go to one of that Yale or the Harvard or something, and then you won't be poor. I don't know any of the details. And this is the kind of person he is. He didn't even know what the SAT was. He just sat down and took it. He ends up going to Yale undergrad, graduating in 3 years with honors, Columbia Law School, Stanford Business School, and now he's also a CPA. And I said, I told him recently, no more education. We have enough student loans. If you go get one more degree, if you go to one more class, you better tell me you're at a bar, because I'm just gonna flip out if you go rack up more student loans. And to give you an idea of how much of a departure this was in his family for him to get this kind of education, his mother drove out with him when he went to Stanford, and the whole drive out there, she kept saying, "Are you sure this Stancliffe place is reputable?" She'd never heard of Stanford. She was worried that this Stancliffe place might be a fly-by-night institution. And again, to give you an idea of his background, while my husband was out there working in Silicon Valley, he had an opportunity that if it had panned out, he would have been employee number 16 at a little startup you might have heard of called Google. But if he'd taken that job, he wouldn't have moved to Austin, and we would have never met. And so I always tell him, honey, who needs $1 billion when you have me? And there are some days when I think he needs to go grab a drink after I say that. So I meet this guy. He's obviously very smart. And I had fallen into this ridiculous notion that is out there in the culture today that atheism is for the intelligentsia. You know that tired old line that, oh, the smart people, the educated people, those are the atheists. And the believers, those are those poor fools that, kind of have a screw loose. I believed this nonsense. And so when I found out that this guy that has all this education, this amazing background, we'd been dating a few months when I found out he believed in God, which was crazy talk enough. And then I find out, even crazier, he considers himself a Christian. I couldn't believe it. And I mean, he didn't read the Bible, he didn't go to church, he didn't do anything like that. He was very open-minded about his faith. But, so I said, how could you possibly be an educated, intelligent person and believe in this Jesus nonsense? I mean, the God thing was crazy enough. And he said, look, I don't know how to explain it except to say that when I was baptized, he told me he was baptized at age 13 in a full dunk Baptist baptism. He was raised Baptist. And he said, at the moment of my baptism, when I came up from the baptismal waters, he said, I encountered something. I encountered someone real. And he said, yeah, I don't read the Bible, I don't go to church, I don't pray as much as I should, but I'll tell you one thing, I will never deny that I encountered a real presence at the moment of my baptism. And so I said, man, this is just crazy talk. I don't know what to do with that. So I just dropped the subject. I didn't need any more crazy talk from this guy. But the reality is that both of us were very focused on our careers, and really we worship the same God. And that was career, it was money, it was lifestyle, that sort of thing. So honestly, it didn't really play that much of a role. So I went on as an atheist in these atheistic beliefs, and the first time, and for many years I just forgot about it. Joe and I got married, we were busy, we were in kind of the party scene, traveling all over the world. So I just wasn't really thinking about my religious beliefs or lack thereof at all. And then our first child was born. And it's hard to describe how much of a shock it was for me to become a parent. I am an only child. My husband is an only child. My dad is an only child. I moved around a lot as a child, so I never had one particular group of friends, and I never knew a friend who had a baby in the house. I never had a friend whose mom had a baby at the time that I knew them, and I don't think I ever had a close friend who had more than one sibling living at home at the time that I knew them. And when my son was born, my husband had never held a baby, and the only baby I had ever held was my two cousins. I'd held two babies in my whole life. So I think that I was so far away from that aspect of the human experience, from babies, from new life, that I think in the back of my mind, I kind of forgot what they taught us in health class about where babies come from. I think I kind of thought that new human life comes from a cloning room at the back of Starbucks, where like 22-year-old people come out fully formed with their latte and their glasses. So to hold this baby, this was a shocking experience for me. And I looked at him, and I did what my dad always told me to do. I looked at him, and I questioned my assumptions. And my dad had always said, if you say you believe something, if you say you assent to an idea, think it through. Don't be one of those people who says you believe something, and then you only follow that belief about halfway. Think it through. Be honest. Be intellectually honest about what you say you believe. So I'm holding my little baby, And I'm thinking, okay, what is he in a true atheist materialist worldview? And I looked down and I thought, oh, what a precious little randomly evolved set of chemical reactions that came from nothing and will return to nothing. And I just thought, at that moment, I just thought, this is false. This is false. I knew, more than I knew anything else in the world at that moment, that the love that I felt for this child, the love that had entered into my home upon his birth and with my marriage, that had a source external to the human brain. That, you know, as an atheist, I would say, oh, you can look at the MRI. Scientists can show you what love is. Yeah, our brains fire certain chemical reactions when we experience love. But I said, no, I know more than I know anything else. I know this to be true, like I know it to be true that the sun will rise tomorrow, that love that I feel comes from something outside of the human brain. And that if the whole world blew up tomorrow, somehow that love would exist in an eternal way. That love is, in a way, more real than reality. And that was the first moment I was no longer an atheist. So what do you do next if you're a lifelong atheist? Well, I'd heard about this thing. I'd seen some kids. I went to a religious college for a while, and I grew up in the Bible Belt. So I'd heard about this thing that people seem to do called prayer. But I didn't know how to pray. I'm a lifelong atheist. And I had all these really nerdy analytical questions like, well, how do I go from talking to myself to talking to whatever might be out there? I made a joke like I had a microphone. Is this thing on? Is my prayer microphone working? So I just said the stupidest, lamest prayer anyone has ever said. I said, if anything, or any things, plural, I'm just trying to be open-minded here. If anything or things are out there, I'm open to hearing from you now. And then I said amen because I'd seen it on TV. And it was so lame because then nothing happened. And look, I've seen the Hallmark specials. I knew that when you finally said a prayer, stuff was supposed to happen. I mean, we were supposed to have chorus of angels, maybe some lights, bare minimum, like a really weird coincidence, like someone knocks at the door and hands me some scriptures or something, but nothing happened. So I realized, okay, well, God doesn't exist, so at least I can scratch that one off. I tried to call and it went to voicemail, so to speak. So I guess either God exists or doesn't care if I know him, so don't need to worry about that. Woo! See, I didn't understand prayer. I thought from cultural osmosis, I had absorbed this idea that prayer is where you make God do things. And so I thought, you know, if I pray, he's supposed to act and like give me a sign and do all this stuff. And I had no idea that God does things in his own time. And prayer is not about, it's not a divine ATM machine where we better control God. So I went on and on for months, and through an amazing series of coincidences, I just happened to stumble across some writing that made the case that maybe there's actually a pretty good case for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Maybe there's something to this Jesus guy. To give you just one example of some of the cases that I found compelling, this guy Lee Strobel, wonderful Protestant pastor, he made the case. He said, you know, something happened in first century Palestine. You know, look at the Jews. They had these cultural and spiritual traditions like animal sacrifice, keeping the Sabbath holy. They held to these traditions for thousands of years, despite unspeakable persecution. You could not get them to shake these traditions. And then you've got this guy named Jesus Christ, named Jesus. He comes from a lower middle class region, gathers a group of lower middle class followers, and he gets crucified along with about 30,000 other men that year. And yet, shortly after the crucifixion, you have waves and waves of Jews, thousands and thousands, one after another, giving up these religious and social institutions that they had been taught since birth would damn their souls to eternal hell for giving up. And then you have all of these people who went to their death saying that they saw Jesus risen from the dead. And this guy, Lee Strobel, points out, sometimes people are willing to die for something that they mistakenly believe to be true. But nobody is willing to be tortured to death to uphold a statement that they know to be false. And yet all these people were willing to be tortured to death rather than recant their statements that they saw Jesus Christ risen from the dead. And so the guy makes this point. He says, you can do all of these mental gymnastics, and people have. Oh, this social phenomenon and this and that, and you can look at that. And he said, you can look at all that, but maybe could we just consider the idea that maybe the explanation for all this is that they actually saw Jesus Christ risen from the dead. So I was intrigued, and I knew what to do next. Again, I used to live in the Bible Belt, so I knew it was time to get a Bible. I didn't own one. So I go down to the bookstore, and I go to the Bible section. I'd never been in a section like that in my life, except the one exception was in 4th grade, I went to my school library, and I took all the Bibles, and I moved them to the fiction section. Oh, I thought it was the edgiest 4th grader anyone's ever seen. So I'm back in the Bible section, a different goal this time. And man, who knew there were so many? I thought there was just gonna be one Bible there. There are all of these Bibles, all of these different types. So I choose the one that looks least like a Bible. It had a cover that didn't say anything on it. And I thought, good, that way if anyone sees me reading it, they won't know what I'm actually reading. And my identity had been so wrapped up in atheism. And this is something to know if you have atheist relatives, loved ones who very openly identify as atheists. I had thought in my group of friends, because atheism was associated as being for the intelligentsia, I thought stupidly that it made me seem smart, that it made me seem intelligent to be an atheist. And so even though I did have reasons for being an atheist, my ego was very wrapped up in this atheism. So the idea of me being seen with the Bible was horrifying to me. I go up to the front, and then I saw some people. I didn't know them, but I was worried, maybe they were watching me purchase this Bible. I felt so weird that I actually asked for a gift receipt really loudly, just in case anyone knew it was a Bible. I said, I'll need a gift receipt with that Bible. It's for a friend. She's a Bible person. So I put it in my opaque bag. I hide my Bible. And now you have to understand, I had no background in Scripture, none. I fell into this idea that I really wanted to be part of a post-Christian culture. I intentionally avoided any knowledge of the Bible, even in history, even in college, because I wanted to make a statement that Christianity is irrelevant, we don't even need it anymore. Like one time when I went to Sunday school with some friends, I would spend the night at people's houses, and my parents were not early risers. So they said, we're a little bit concerned about people pushing their religion on you, but not so concerned that we're gonna get up at 7 o'clock in the morning for you to be dropped off after spend the night. So I would just go to church with them. And one time I went to a friend's Bible study, and in this day, and back in the day, you could not say you were an atheist. And so when they said, what church does your family attend? I would always say, oh, well, it's the, kind of long story. Could not say that we did not go to church. So this sweet teacher says, okay, we're gonna play a game where we take she had the books of the Bible written on different cards, and she said, we'll put them in order of the Bible, and where they are in the Bible. And in one of the most horrifying moments of my childhood, it's like a movie, like imagine the camera zooming in on my horrified face, she turns to me and says, why don't we let our guest start? If they had Chinese characters on them, these words could not have meant less to me. But I was gonna give it a good shot. So I figured Revelation. You'd probably start a book with that. So I put Revelation first, and then Numbers. That's probably a table of contents. So then Numbers, and then the names I recognize, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's probably introducing some characters. So I put those next. And all these like Deuteronomy and all this, I didn't know what to do with that, so I kind of put that at the end. Kings is probably at the end. And so I'm just guessing. And the Bible study teacher looks at this list I've created, and she looks up at me and says, honey, where did you say y'all's family goes to church again? So that was my knowledge of the Bible. So I get my Bible, and it's a book, right? You start books on page 1, right? And the main character always comes in by page 30, page 50 at the latest. So I'm reading along in my Bible, and I knew from those Sunday school classes there were some fishermen, and there was some bread and some cool stuff happened. And I get into Deuteronomy and some of this Old Testament stuff, and I'm thinking, whoa, where are the fishermen? What's going on here? This is craziness. And I was driving Joe crazy because he'd come home from work stressed out, and I'd have my Bible open, and I'd say, Joe, have you tried sacrificing a bird over a clay jar and dipping red yarn and hyssop in its blood? And it's in the Bible. You should be doing this. So Joe tells me, no, cut this off. You've got to skip to the New Testament. That's where Jesus comes in. That's where this religion will make sense to you. So I said, okay, I go to the New Testament. And I honestly thought it was going to start with a little bit more of a bang. I get to the New Testament, it's a list of names. So I didn't know what to do with this. So I go through, and then it ends with Revelation. I'm like, this is some guy's dream. I don't know what to make of this. I honestly thought that the book would end with some sort of call to action. Like, if you find this compelling, the next step is to do this and that. I did not know what to make of this book. And here was the most troubling thing. The question I was asking, ever since I'd been turned on to this idea that maybe there was a compelling case for Jesus Christ, the question I'd been asking all along was, who is Jesus Christ? I was an atheist. I wasn't raised Christian. I didn't know. Who is Jesus Christ? And here's the thing. I would go on the internet and I would research and I would see what different people had to say, and I was getting all these different answers. Because, for example, there would be people over here who say, oh, Jesus doesn't even care about what you want to do. No, there's no moral code. There's no right, there's no wrong. You just do whatever you want to do. Abortion, euthanasia, marriage is whatever you want it to be. It's all good. That's what Jesus is about. And then there were people over here who would say, you know, Jesus wants us to love even to the point of self-sacrifice. And Jesus calls us to respect every single human life from natural conception until natural death, even if it means great personal sacrifice. And there's some rules, like love always has rules. You can't do whatever you want and be a loving person. And yeah, he calls us to a very high standard of love, and it's not easy, but it's the kind of love that can change the world. And then there were people who would say, oh, Jesus is wrathful, and he just is really anxious to send people to hell, and he's always angry with us all the time. And then people over here who would say, Jesus is mercy. And yes, he calls us to that high standard of love, but he understands that we will fail sometimes, and he is there, and he loves us anyway. And so I'm looking at all these different answers, and I say, God, guys, this is not the same Jesus. You are describing different Jesuses to me. This is not the same person. I could not get a clear answer about the very basic question, who is Jesus Christ? And also, and people would say, well, you need to read the whole Bible and read the New Testament and read the Old Testament so that you can interpret the scriptures in concert with one another. And I wanted to say, don't y'all have jobs? Because, like, when do you think I am going to have time? I had 2 young children at the time. When do you think I'm going to have time to basically get my PhD as a scripture scholar so that I can answer the most basic questions about Jesus Christ and who he is and what he represents? And I also thought, you know, this system of I read the whole Bible and I know what it's all about and I know how to interpret it, this requires literacy. The world literacy rate is only 80%. In most times and places in history, the vast majority of people could not read. And not just literacy, but high reading comprehension skills. The free time to be able to do all this reading, not to mention the printing press. I'm thinking, what did people do before the printing press? That was invented in the 1500s. Before that, every single book had to be, every word of every book had to be written by hand. The average person could not own a Bible, let alone a concordance and a biblical encyclopedia. And so I looked around and I said, this system doesn't work. This system doesn't make sense. Christianity doesn't make sense. So I'd started a blog, like the nerd that I am. That's what you do when you have a religious exploration as a nerd. And unbeknownst to me, I'd recruited all these people to read my blog, and I'd found them because they did great jobs of demolishing atheist arguments in other places online. Little did I know, I had recruited all Catholics to comment on my blog. To a man, all of these people who could demolish atheistic arguments were all Catholic. But I didn't know that. So I go on there and I said, I made this point. I said, I cannot get a clear answer from modern Christianity about who is Jesus Christ. This system of interpreting the entire Bible for myself and piecing out the moral code, this also doesn't make sense. Your religion is not holding up to scrutiny. I thought I had some good points. I thought these guys were gonna come back and say, oh my gosh, our whole religion is a fraud. Where is the nearest Buddhist temple? But they didn't. They said something interesting. They said, all right, Jen, how about this? They said, what if before Jesus returned to heaven, he founded a church, one church that he instilled with his own authority, that he promised to be with until the end of the age? What if he used this church to convey perfect truth for all times and all places through a living church? What if, just like he did with the writers of the Bible, he took imperfect people, people who make mistakes, and worked through them to convey perfect truth? And I said, oh, yes, that makes so much sense. Yes, that explains how illiterate people could come to know God. Through this authority, that explains how we can get one clear answer to the question of who is Jesus Christ. That explains how people could know the truth about Christianity before the printing press, for people who don't have time or the ability to read the whole Bible. Oh, yes. And they said, that's the Catholic Church. And I said, no. What? No. Oh, go away, guys. I couldn't become Catholic. And Joe raised Baptist. Oh, Joe was saying, man, it's bad enough you're messing around with this blog, these internet people. Now you're messing around with Catholic internet people. I'm about to cancel our internet connection. This is getting out of control. And Joe had been interested in my religious exploration. He'd been kind of following along. And I said, Joe, we have nowhere else to turn. No other theory within modern Christianity even makes sense. And so for lack of any better options, we started reading what the Catholic Church has to say. It never occurred to me that I would see the sense in all of it. I was pro-choice. I donated to Planned Parenthood in the National Organization of Women. I said I would fight and die to defend a woman's right to choose as I thought of it. I didn't even know you could be pro-contraception. I thought, who's anti-contraception? I thought it was an urban legend that Catholics actually thought that way. And marriage, I was one of those like, oh yeah, whatever you want marriage to be. But when I actually read up on what the Catholic Church has to say for itself, the only way to describe it is that it was like encountering the owner's manual to the human soul. It was as if I finally understood how to be human. All the desires of all the yearnings that were written on my heart all along were here, poured out in the wisdom of the Catholic Church. And when Joe and I considered that this wisdom has been around for 2,000 years, after empire has fallen away from around the Catholic Church, it is usually the most hated institution in any given time and place in history. And yet it's still here, still saying the same thing, despite a lot of really fallible, messed up people being among its ranks. Joe and I said, we see something here that humans can't do on their own. We see the fingerprints of God on this church. And so I'll spoil the end of my book and I'll say Joe and I both become Catholic at the end. And any of you who have had a conversion or a reversion to the church know that's where it ends, right? You come back to the church and then your life gets really easy and everything's fine, right? Right. So right around the time we converted, during my second pregnancy, I was diagnosed with a deep vein thrombosis. It's a blood clot in a major vein. Turns out it is caused by a genetic clotting disorder. It's very rare, and I inherited it from both parents. So I don't know if they met at a family reunion or what, but it's very rare that I would have both copies of this gene. And so it makes pregnancy dangerous for me, and I have to have, in order to get through this pregnancy, I had to have these blood thinners that cost about $1,000 a month. So we get through that pregnancy, and God had called us on this totally different path. We used to live downtown and drive a fancy car, and God had called us on a completely different path. We were now living with my mom and just broke and struggling for money. We didn't have insurance that would cover pregnancy, and we were just in a tough spot. And then in a moment that shows that sometimes God's timing is a little different than our own, we found out that we were expecting again, only 5 months after the pregnancy where I had had that deep vein thrombosis. The medicine that I needed, literally life-saving medicine for me, was, again, $1,000 a month. We didn't have it. We didn't have insurance that would cover pregnancy. We were living with my mother. We had no room. We had no place to live. We were out of room. We were all crammed into a bedroom in my mother's house. And with 2 kids already, this was our third, we were in dire straits. And I prayed, I turned to God and I just said, this is not what I signed up for. I thought that being Catholic was gonna be like being an atheist, but with less free time on Sundays. I thought, what am I supposed to do? I mean, my life is falling apart. Like, what is this? Being Catholic is for the birds. This is terrible. And so I came across this quote at the time. It's this amazing quote, and you might have had a moment like this where I just came across it and I knew that these words were what I was supposed to hear right now, that it was for me. It's from Blessed Mary Elizabeth Hesselblad. She says, "Dear Lord, I do not ask to see the path. In darkness, in anguish, and in fear, I will hang on tightly to your hand and I will close my eyes. I will close my eyes so that you know how much trust I place in you." For a control freak, former lifelong atheist, this was a crazy notion. God was asking me to close my eyes, to let go, to let him actually work in my life. And here's the thing, and here's where mercy comes into it. Once I became Catholic, I understood that these so-called rules of the church are rules of love. It's God teaching us how to love, and that sin isn't about feeling bad or beating yourself up or feeling nasty or anything like that. It's just admitting your failures to love. And once I got all that out at my first confession and had that mirror held up to how many times I'd failed to love, shortly after that, as a new Catholic, in the back of my mind, I would have never admitted this, but in the back of my mind, I thought, well, God doesn't really forgive me for all of that. I mean, that one thing I did, that one thing I said, he doesn't really forgive me. And then in the situation I was in, I thought, you know, I haven't been praying enough. I probably wasn't even listening to God. So I can't ask him for help. He's up there in heaven saying, you idiot, you made that bad decision. You're on your own now. That's really how I saw it. And it was through that quote from Blessed Mary Elizabeth and this encounter with mercy that I realized maybe God will help me. Even if I've made mistakes, even if I've committed horrible sins, even if right now I'm in a bad situation through my own stupid fault. And so I closed my eyes, and I was so foolish. I didn't even know better than to say a prayer like this, and I said, okay, God, here we go. I need a house. I need you to cover this medicine that's so expensive. And by the way, if I get a house, we used to live in a loft downtown. I don't have any furniture. I would need a coffee table, a couch, a refrigerator, a bed, and lawn equipment. So, all right, there, I'm closing my eyes. Amen. So shortly after that, my husband and I were going home from Mass and traffic got diverted. We drove by a house that had a for sale by owner sign in front of it. We call, the owner had just put up that sign a couple of hours before we drive by. Long story short, we got that house so cheap that our mortgage company required a sworn affidavit saying that we did not have a previous relationship with the owner because they could not believe that we got the house that cheap. My dad was offered a job in the Cayman Islands, tough gig, that also included a fully furnished apartment. He called and he said, hey, I've got a couch, a coffee table, and a bed. Do you have any, I don't know what to do with it. By the way, I had told nobody about this prayer. No, this was a private thing. Then my mom calls. She says, you know, all of my appliances are black and I have this white refrigerator. I've been dying to get a black refrigerator forever. When you guys get that new house, could you take my refrigerator? Then the owner of the house, who sold it to us so cheaply, said he was moving into a condo complex where all the lawn stuff was taken care of. And he said he was giving us his full suite of lawn equipment as a gift to us when we moved into the house. And I thought, now was that God? I don't know, I'm not sure. Yeah, because it could be coincidence, yeah. Huh. So then I went to the pharmacy. These people at the pharmacy, I was like a celebrity at the pharmacy. Nobody had medicine as expensive as mine. So they would always take pity on me and hand me samples. And keep in mind, this is life-saving stuff that I needed, this medicine. So I go in, and I was gonna ask for some samples, and I kind of disheveled my hair, tried to look extra pathetic. So I go in, and I'm giving them my spiel. Oh, I'm out of my medicine, and do you have any samples? But the girl wasn't really paying attention, so she just rings it up, and she says, that'll be a $30 copay. And I said, oh, you know, I'm tempted to take that, but I don't want to do paperwork later, so let me just tell you, it's not $30. Just go get the right amount. She said, no, I'm looking, it's $30. So I walk out with that month's supply of medicine. I walk out and I say, was that God? You know, yeah, because that could be a coincidence. And so I go back the next month, and then another thing is we got health insurance that finally covered my pregnancy, despite it being a pre-existing condition, and it would cover this medicine. And this new insurance had a $50 copay. I'm telling you all these details for a reason. This new insurance that started the next month would have a $50 copay. So a couple weeks before that insurance took effect, I go back down to the pharmacy and I say, you know, I thought I'd save the 20 bucks. The other one was $30 copay. I'd save the 20 bucks difference. So I go in and I hand them, get my medicine, and they say, oh, that'll be $986.42. And it, you know, it didn't matter too much because, again, the new insurance started, but I said, no, it's a $30 copay now. I know it never was before, but last time I was here, it was. And he said, no, I'm checking. It's the $900 amount. And I said, no, I was just here, and I got the $30 copay. And I said, just look it up. And so he's typing and typing, and he looks up and he says, ma'am, we have no record of that transaction. Okay, then I finally said that was God. And what is the lesson here? Is the lesson that you pray and you give God a laundry list of things and then he just gives it to you? No, although if that is true, I do want to note that I have my eye on the new iPhone 6, if that is how it works. No, the lesson is that God is a real force in your life. For me, coming from atheism, God was just a concept. He was the concept that you read about in a book. I didn't see him as someone who would be real, who would actually do things in my life. And I couldn't understand that until I understood mercy. And that even when I am in messes that are of my own doing, God still cares. And he still wants to be a force in my life and to work in my life for my good. One of my favorite quotes that sits in my office, I look at it every day, it's from Pope Francis. He says, always, even in the darkest moments, even in moments of sin, even in moments of weakness, even in moments of failure, I have seen Jesus and I have trusted him. He has not left me alone. I look at that quote every day because he starts it by saying, even in moments of darkness, even in moments of sin and in failure, I have seen Jesus and I have trusted him. He has not left me alone. And by the way, as a postscript, that pregnancy that was so difficult with all the medicine and everything, the daughter who was born is right there. Lucy, she's with me. She'll be at my table later. So that's the final thought I want to leave you with. So that is the final thought that I want to leave you with, is that you will never fully understand God until you understand his mercy. And a little PS, so this, I told you at the beginning that it's very special for me to be here today. And let me tell you why. So when we went to have our children baptized after we became Catholic. By the way, let me just tell you, different denominations debate infant versus adult baptism. Nobody advocates for toddler baptism. There's a reason for that. So the day of my 3-year-old's baptism, I'm running around. I wear a lot of dark colors, so I'm looking for something white to wear. I'm opening all these drawers, and I'm asking God, the words were on my lips, how did I get here? How did I get here? I was a militant atheist my whole life, born and raised. It never even occurred to me that God might exist. I thought of all the moments, things that could have gone differently. Something could have gone this way or that, and I would have ended up on a totally different track. And I asked God, how did I get here? And with those words, literally they were on my lips as I opened a drawer and a box slid to the front. And I picked it up, and it was my baptism candle. I was baptized when I was a baby. My mother came from an Irish Catholic family, and my maternal grandparents, who I never really knew, they both passed away when I was very young. It was part of their Irish Catholic tradition that just you take your babies to get baptized. And I was actually baptized here in Atlanta, Georgia. I was born in Atlanta, and I was baptized at Our Lady of the Assumption Church. And so for me to be here speaking at the Eucharistic Congress, I fell so far, my mother fell so far away from the church. I mean, we were so far away from our Irish Catholic roots that at one point in high school, I asked a stupid question, and someone said, oh, come on, Jen, is the Pope Catholic? And I had to ask the person next to me, is the Pope Catholic? That is how far away from the Catholic Church we were. I had no idea what it even meant to be Catholic. I was never in a Catholic church that I remember after that, after the moment of my baptism at Our Lady of the Assumption here in Atlanta. But that was the answer to my question, how did I get here? And this is the message of hope I want to leave you with for any of you who know someone who has fallen away from the Catholic Church. This was the answer I got as I held that baptism candle. I realized at the moment I was baptized, it's not just a symbol. I was sealed with an indelible mark of belonging to Christ that not even an entire life as an unrepentant atheist could wipe away. And remember that if you know people who were raised Catholic and are far, far away from the church. There's hope for everyone. God can reach anyone. But there is special hope for your loved ones who were baptized Catholic. Because like me, they have belonged to Christ all along. Thank you.